Crawley with Talkback on BBC Radio Ulster.
So the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has in the past hour or so confirmed his plans to bring in a new digital ID system in the UK aimed at tackling illegal working in the country. It's a very controversial move. The other big parties in Westminster are pushing back already. There's a petition online which has, I think, something like 800,000 names now attached to it opposing this move by the government. But of course, the Labour Party has a really big majority in Westminster, and short of a very significant rebellion on the government benches, this is likely to become the law of the land. And I'm asking you how you feel about that. A law requiring every single adult who wants to have a job or work in the UK to have a digital ID. We'll debate that with you in a moment, but first let's bring you the Prime Minister's announcement of those plans this morning.
Now, you will all have issues in your own countries, but in Britain it's illegal migration, and I suspect that may be the same in a number of other countries. For too many years it's been too easy for people to come here, slip into the shadow economy and remain here illegally. Because, frankly, we've been squeamish about saying things that are clearly true. It's not just that it's not compassionate left-wing politics to rely on Labour that exploits foreign workers and undercuts fair wages, but the simple fact that every nation needs to have control over its borders. We do need to know who is in our country. Our immigration system does need to be fair if we want to maintain that binding contract that our politics is built on. Otherwise, it undermines trust, undermines people's faith that we're on their side, and their belief that the state can and will work for them. And that is why today I am announcing this government will make a new free-of-charge digital ID mandatory for the right to work by the end of this Parliament. Let me spell that out. You will not be able to work in the United Kingdom if you do not have digital ID. It's as simple as that.
Let's speak with Noah Hoffman, who's political correspondent with The Sun. Hi, Noah. Good to have you with us.
Good afternoon.
Obviously, this was well trailed. There was lots of reaction and a lot of pushback last night on social media and various TV interviews and radio interviews already. So an unexpected, not unexpected announcement today. What's been the political reaction in Westminster?
So from Labour MPs, the vast majority are supportive of this move. There are various Labour MPs who are putting forward the civil liberties argument that we're seeing from other parties to argue against it. But generally, I don't think Keir Starmer will have a problem getting this through Parliament in the way that we've seen much more forthright disapproval on topics such as the two-child benefit cap, for instance. We're not seeing that level of retaliation from Labour. When it comes to other political parties, Reform and the Lib Dems have very much come out against digital ID as an idea. But the Tories, interestingly, they don't categorically say digital ID is something that we would never support. They more link disapproval to the idea of it being a silver bullet in solving the illegal migration crisis.
And of course, the Prime Minister says it wouldn't be a silver bullet. It would be just one of a number of measures.
Yeah, that's correct. It won't be a silver bullet because, as we know, the main issue with illegal migration at the moment is the absolute headache that it is to deport people. Now, if illegal migrants think that they can come to the UK and the government will have a tough time getting rid of them back to other countries, they will continue to come.
We've got this petition I've just mentioned there, Noah, 800,000, who knows, it might get over 1 million. I wonder if any of that then spills over into public protests or demonstrations against what some people will regard as an encroachment by the government on their personal freedoms. This is potentially difficult for the Prime Minister, even if he has the numbers to get it through legislatively, isn't it?
I think it is, yes, it's difficult, but there is a very strong case that he can make, which is effectively the rise of internet, of social media, of digital footprints. We've all given up all of our ID to these companies and to the big tech firms anyway. We've also already given up all of our sort of IDs to various government institutions, whether it's the NHS, whether it's HMRC. Our data is all there. It's just not all collated in a more efficient way in the form of sort of one app or one card. So if your argument is that, digital ID is encroaching on civil liberties, well, everything that's contained within a digital ID is already retained by the state in some form. This just makes it much more efficient and would have the added benefit of sort of cracking down on illegal migration as well, but also meaning that you don't have to sort of scurry to find some old council tax invoice or a bank statement in order to access various state services. So I think if the government can make that argument and in a sort of in a strong and forthright way, while also sort of empathising with the civil liberty concerns, I do think that eventually this will die down. I mean, if you look across a lot of other European countries, most of them have them. In Australia, they have them. We are generally far behind in terms of other states in not having them.
Are they really going to call it a Brit Card?
Well, last night, that was being denied to my colleagues and I. So that's the line that we got was that this was not the name, but we still see it being used in reporting today. I would be surprised if that was the name that was used.
Like, I mean, we've had BritBox in the past with a kind of British version of Netflix that was attempted. Brit Card would obviously have a different political resonance in some parts of Northern Ireland.
Absolutely, I would be surprised if they go ahead with that. I'm sure they would be smart to opt for a much more a name that's agreed much more widely by all areas of the UK.
And how would this look? Would it be app based? Would it be smartphone based? What about people who don't have smartphones?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the Home Office is very aware of that, everyone needs to be able to access state services and not everyone has a smartphone. And they do say that this is something that's being worked on. It's not a forgotten issue, but there is we don't have full details of the plan yet. But the Home Office was clear to us yesterday that there will be alternatives and they'll be looking to cover all the sort of holes in the area in this topic as it stands.
And just finally, Noah, even if this does prove to be controversial for Keir Starmer's government in its introduction, if it works, if it becomes a useful tool that people can access public service information and contact the government through it, almost a kind of government approach to what the banks have done over the years with accessing their services. If it works, is it likely that it will still be controversial 3 or 4 years' time from now when we're looking at the next Westminster election?
Well, do you know what? That's an interesting question because we haven't heard from other parties yet whether they would commit to repealing it. And I think that's interesting because if this does actually improve efficiency in terms of accessing state services and cracking down on illegal migration, it would be an interesting move for a party to then rescind that. And we haven't seen any commitments to do so. So I think there will always be campaigners who understandably are very concerned by this. But if it works, as Labour is confident that it will, I think they do suspect that the argument will simmer down over the years.
Noah, thank you very much. Noah Hoffman, the political correspondent for The Sun. Kevin Curran's also with us, Professor of Cybersecurity at Ulster University. Hi, Kevin.
Good afternoon, William.
Noah was just mentioning there that there are various kinds of government ID schemes in various parts of the world. What's being proposed here as a smartphone-based digital ID card, if I can call it that, is that still rare, though, amongst all of that digital activity in government?
Yeah, a lot of countries do not have a centralised national ID system, but of course Estonia and many others do. And it's not without precedent. Even in the United States, For 21 years, they have an e-verify system, which is exactly what this scheme seems to want to do. It's where the identity documents for any person going for a job in 10 states in America rolled this out. It's been out since 2004. So it's a way to verify that someone has the correct visa requirements and work permit to work within the country. But there's a lot of issues with that, actually, in America as well, where people who were legitimately eligible to work have been refused work and whatever else. So we've had precedents of this in other countries again. But of course, civil liberty campaigners, of course, are opposed to any of this. But in some ways, it's like a solution looking for a problem. Because what we have, of course, is national IDs like passports. And you might think, well, surely a passport will, if you're a British citizen, that means you're allowed to work. But of course, we have a lot of people on visas and they don't necessarily have a British passport, but they actually are eligible to work here. So this is kind of a scheme to try to make a linkable, verifiable credential that anyone can check online. But it does nothing for the shadow economy, really. For the people who just will pay cash, will hire these people.
Yeah.
We can get this information to verify that someone actually is. Anyone who is checking documents, like we do at Ulster University, we check the visa requirements. We get the eligibility. We're able to cross-reference it with third-party database. We are able right now, and have been for many years, able to check if someone has the right to work in the UK, and we do not proceed if anyone, because of the fines which are imposed. This proposed database doesn't speed it up, and it doesn't really make any difference. We have those processes and checks right now.
But why wouldn't it speed it up? If I'm an employer and I do want to check, I take your point that if I want to break the law, I'll go and break the law anyway. But if I want to check if someone has the right to work in the UK, and I simply say, well, show me your digital ID, which on the screen will say right to work, that's the end of my checking.
Fair enough. It might speed it up a few minutes or whatever else. It's the cost. We're seeing costs here of $1 billion upwards and the rollout again. So again, I'm just thinking, maybe the government could save money or whatever, there could be benefits. And I'm not in the camp either of the civil liberty campaigners as well, because the government have all the information they need on me. They have from my driving license. And I also don't see the governments as nefarious always. I don't. I try to obey the government and its rules, and sometimes they try to push out schemes. So I'm not opposed to every scheme, but I'm also looking for cost efficiencies here. And me, if I was in government tomorrow, this would not be one of the schemes I would be pushing for efficiency and for government savings.
What about data concerns? Some raising lots of concerns about how the government might hold your data, and then there could be hacks, there could be breaches of centralised data systems.
Yeah, it's another centralised database with very clean information and useful information, with my ID, my social security number, whatever else. But, the government also have all that detail in the Home Office.
But it's spread out. It's spread out across government.
Yeah, but it's still in a centralised database, really, and so have the tax office and everything else. And all these databases have been scraped already by our foreign states. Don't worry about that. They have the details again, but every new clean data set is useful. But we have ways to secure things again. It's not necessarily, that it's going to leak. But no, I'm not so much worried about the security aspect because, again, most of our data is online, whatever else, It's just maybe I question the value for money for such a scheme.
And of course, it's going to cost to run this. There'll be a cost to run this system.
Maybe I'm seeing 100 million a year.
Is that what you're saying? 100 million a year? I haven't seen that number, but would it be a commercial company that would get the contract?
Usually everything is being outsourced. Even the data is being outsourced to third parties.
The whole country's adult information, every adult in the country, given to a corporate company to run data.
Well, that's the era we live in. I mean, about 6 months ago, the payroll system for the military in the UK was backdoored, right? So all the payroll data and a lot of data on military personnel. The company who implemented that and were running it and maintaining it were French. Not even a UK-based company again.
And we had a data breach.
Yes, we did, yeah.
Yeah. So that's not exactly encouraging, is it?
No, I mean, it's like everything else.
You sound
The more
quite blasé
information
about this whilst telling us we've had this already and there has been a data breach already. Shouldn't that make you less blasé about the government doing this?
No, because I know the complexity involved in modern systems again. I know how much data is out there and people have no idea as well. And, I'm more worried about my bank. But we do have systems in place which can actually secure our data. In all my years, my account has never been drained yet. Banks have great, systems and checks in place as well. But, we are moving to, where everything is online. That's important to us, really, and our finance. And, we haven't even gone near the cryptocurrencies, whatever else. So,
yeah.
We just got to accept that most of our credentials are out there. Everything is moving online. And not virtual signaling. The one thing that worries me, and again, that there's 1.7 million people over the age of 75 who don't have a smartphone in the UK. And they're the people I feel sorry for, because everything is moving online. The post offices are closing, the high street banks are closing their presences online. Everything's going virtual. And then there's this cluster of vulnerable people who really cannot, can you expect an 80-year-old to deal with multi-factor authentication, to download an authenticator app, to go back in and, whatever else. And all these systems require all that now because, of course, that security comes at the expense of, ease of use. And there is a lot of people, again, who will, not be able to do a lot of things in the future because everything requires a smartphone going forward.
The sales pitch for this is quite interesting. I see the Tony Blair Institute involved in recent days in arguing for this kind of technology. And as I said to Noah a minute ago, the analogy seems to be doing for government what the banks have done with their banking services over the years in terms of access and the way in which you encounter government, digital government, which means with these smartphones and the apps on them, you'd be able to find solutions faster. You'd be able to report potholes. You'd be able to avoid spending hours navigating pretty opaque systems or paperwork-based systems, and get faster responses, get faster interaction with government. That's the pitch anyway, a move from analog government to digital government. It's quite a pitch.
It is. It is, in some ways you can't argue with that. If it works, fine. But we do know when governments get involved with technology, and I've seen it so much, where the UK government just a few weeks ago had to roll back on the requirement for Apple to put a backdoor into their messaging platform, into their system. And of course, that's impossible. All the experts in cyber were telling them, no, this is crazy. And the English government had to roll back on it. Now, let me give you the other example that affects every one of us every day and wastes their time. The European Commission, in all their wisdom, decided that we will make life more secure online for everyone. What we'll do is we'll pop up a cookie pop-up on everyone's screen, and they have to click OK or accept or reject. And that will make everyone more secure. And all it does is waste their time, makes our browsing less seamless, and it does nothing for security because they didn't listen to security people. They just wanted a law going through, and they hadn't got a clue that a cookie pop-up does nothing. Where GDPR came along later and was much better, and it says let's fine companies if they're lax with our data, they process more than they need, and all these good things. Put the onus back in the companies, not a simple pop-up on screen that everyone clicks through on. Governments often get things wrong, especially about technology, because, of course, it changes so much. But of course, it's incredible for us how often they get these things wrong. This one is more about the expense. Again, I'm not in the camp saying the government wants to control everything. And of course, this is lumped in with the fear of central digital bank currencies as well. That's the main thing again. And ultimately, a lot of this fear about national ID cards again, it goes back to basically the end of the world where, that the 666, the number of the beast, that's everything that you will have to do will require typing in the number of the beast. And most people accept that will be some form of digital currency. And
I'm expecting sermons this weekend on those Bible texts around this. But, just finally, Kevin, it's one thing if you happen to like the government that you have at present and you happen to think, I can trust those guys with my data. But civil libertarians will be saying, think about a future government that you may not like. Think about a future government, for example, in Germany, if the AfD got elected, or if something like Orban got elected, or if something like Putin got elected. Would you be happy for that government of the future to have all your data and then ask yourself, is this a good idea?
Listen, the government, if a corrupt government came in tomorrow into the UK, let's deal with the UK, tomorrow morning, and even without this being rolled out, they can gather everything about me and they could have it, within the day. They will know my addresses, where I visited, they will get my tax returns, they will get they've got everything. They've got access to all these databases already. Yes, maybe a little bit of correlation across the databases and merge it into one. They will have the same view. They have it already. This doesn't give them any more power.
Just makes it easier for them to exert that power.
Yes, it does make it easier in that case. Right. But they have it already.
Thank you, Kevin. That's Kevin Curran from Ulster University, their Professor of Cybersecurity. Let's get some of your calls on this. 03030 80 55 55. Been trying to lay it out for you, give you a sense of what this might look like. And this is the future we appear to be going into in the next couple of years. Davy's in Limavady. How do you feel about it, Davy?
Hello, William. How are you?
Welcome.
Well, this is the way I feel. I feel it would be much more simple to digital ID all the people who are not eligible to work as those who are eligible to work. Now, Starmer himself mentioned this morning that it was to curb immigration. So why don't they start with the illegal immigrants and digital ID them? And when they go for employment, say, no, sorry, you can't be here.
Well, of course, you wouldn't need to give a digital ID to an illegal immigrant. If someone is illegally in the country, then you deport them, you arrest them, detain them, deport them, right? That's what the government will do in the case of people who are illegally in the country.
Yes, but that's not happening.
That's a different point. Why is that not happening in greater number? But maybe the proposal you're making, Davy, is why give this digital ID to every British citizen? Why give it to non-citizens more generally? Why not give it to non-citizens?
Exactly.
So that they can be the group that is checked.
On the other point, how are we here in Northern Ireland? Well, it's all right, because that goes entirely against the Good Friday Agreement.
Would it?
Well, it certainly would.
How so?
Well, how are we going to control people who come in from Southern Ireland who are they not going to be employable here anymore?
Well, under these rules, they would need if they're in the jurisdiction of the UK, they would need, if they're an adult, a digital ID.
Exactly, yes. So is that going to, what about a bus driver coming across the border? Does he need a digital ID?
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, I think the rules that are being proposed here, Davy, by the government are when you're hiring someone in the jurisdiction of the UK as a worker, when you're hiring them, right, you have to check their digital ID in the future. Obviously, if the bus driver was hired in Dublin, say, and was crossing the border as part of their job, that's different. They're not hired in the jurisdiction of the UK.
Okay, so then what about the contractors, the brickies, the joiners and all, who come up here to work on a daily basis?
Coming and going.
Thousands of them.
And they're working part of the time in one jurisdiction and cross-border in the other. Yep. These are going to be issues.
So there's issues here that haven't been considered. I mean, I think Starmer's went off on one to avoid people voting for the Reform Party in England. I think he's trying to please the people, and he's not actually pleasing them. He's just making things worse for himself.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Davy. Somebody here says Crawley's missing the point. Northern Irish people do not all identify as British. No, we're not missing that point. I asked a question about the Brit Card. We're not even sure at this point if it is going to be called a Brit Card. But this, if you look at your driving licence, you have a very different looking driving licence in Northern Ireland to the rest of the UK, because we had some of those symbolic flag issues, you'll remember, around the driving licence, and they found a way around that to respect the uniqueness of our situation in Northern Ireland. So yeah, it's an issue, but is it an irresolvable issue? We've resolved that issue with other kinds of cards in the past. Why not this one? Jim's in Lisburn. Hi, Jim.
Oh, hi, William. Interesting conversation. And it struck me, when I turned 16, and I assume it's still the same, the government issues everyone with a national insurance number.
Yeah.
And the first thing that any employer, once they offer you a job, the first thing they'll ask you for is your national insurance number. Right?
Yep.
So we apply for our national ID, whatever it's going to be called and whatever way, shape it takes form. What information is the government going to ask for to get the digital ID?
Mm-hmm.
No use asking for a passport. Not everyone has one. No use asking for a driving licence. Not everyone has one. But what do we all have? A national insurance number.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the point of the ID if the national insurance number is the source of the information in the first place?
Well, given that the government is linking this ID card to the right to work,
which your national insurance number allows you to do.
Though it may not be the only way to indicate your right to work, there may be different documentation pathways into a right to work if you're a migrant, for example. They say this will quicken up the entire process so that an employer won't have to go through onerous checks to find out whether you have the right to work. This little app will say right away, this person has the right to work.
Look, William, this is the thin end of the wedge. What they really want,
a Benite solution. Yes.
What they really want is the same situation as you have in France, where you have a national ID card, and at any stage in the game, any member of the security forces or immigration or passport control or anyone else in France can say, show me your ID.
Papers, please.
Your appearance, yes.
Yeah.
And that's the thin edge of the wedge. That's what this is all about.
So why would they be doing that if that's the case?
Because the police at the moment, if you're stopped by a policeman at the moment, right, say you're accused of shoplifting or something, whatever it might be, there is nothing in the law that says that you must carry ID in the UK. You're not required by law to carry ID. Mm-hmm. And you'll see it on police programmes regularly on the TV. Have you any ID on you? You must have something. Yeah. You know, have you got a credit card, you got a driving licence, you got your passport. But you're not required to have it. So this would mean they could necessarily bring in a law that says you must have this with you at all times.
Well, except we haven't seen what the terms of the law will be, but the government is not suggesting that this would be a card that is required to be shown in any situation. Well, we'll see if the law that brings it in does that.
They not do that.
Well, they'll have to do that in law if they're going to give the police the right to demand to see your card.
They'll do it at a later stage.
At the later stage. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. Yeah. We'll keep an eye on that.
But once it's implemented, once it's there and in place, then it's much easier.
Then you think it could expand?
To do it, yes. It's much easier after that, yeah.
Very interesting. I get your concerns, Jim. Thank you very much. Michael's there too in Newton Abbey. Hi, Michael. Oh, Michael, we've lost Michael. Let's get into some of your texts as well. 81771. This is a complete nonsense. It will not work in Northern Ireland with an open border with the Republic. It goes against the spirit and letter of the Common Travel Area and the Good Friday Agreement, says this listener. If you're born in Northern Ireland, you don't have to have a British passport. It's an optional extra. Mike says, why can't they just say you have to have either a passport or this card, or just add a photograph to the national insurance card? Lots of people are wondering, do we really need this even to achieve what Keir Starmer says it's out to achieve, which was to challenge or tackle illegal working in the UK? We're joined by Tom Kelly, Irish News columnist, former SDLP Director of Comms, the barrister and broadcaster Andrew Eborn, and the Sinn Féin MP Chris Hazard. Welcome, guys. Good to have you all with us. Chris, give us your first pass at a response to this. We've kind of seen this coming for a while now. We've got the announcement today.
Well, afternoon, William. I suppose first and foremost for myself as a point of principle, you know, as an Irish citizen living here in Ireland, the very thought or prospect of having to hold a British national identity card. I know people have obviously termed it a Brit Card, that supposedly, and to quote the British Secretary Lisa Nandy last night on BBC, to prove my right to be here. You know, they were her words last night in question time, not mine. That very proposal, I think, will be absolutely opposed, not just by myself, but by thousands of people living here in the north of Ireland. I think, as others have outlined already, the proposal definitely represents an attack on the Good Friday Agreement and on the rights of Irish citizens in the north. And whilst the threat might not necessarily come from a physical barrier, it will absolutely exist as a legal and digital one that will undermine the Good Friday Agreement's core principle of parity of esteem and indeed the fundamental rights of citizens living here in the north of Ireland.
How would it do that? I see somebody also referencing, Chris, the Common Travel Area in addition to the Good Friday Agreement. How would it threaten those agreements?
Well, you have everything to do with parity of steam. So if we accept that and set that to the side, then any mandatory enforcement of a national ID, for example, will create a digital border on the island of Ireland. And your first caller actually outlined some of those. That'll force employers, landlords, etc., to enforce a more rigorous, a new system of centrally checked identity. You know, we've had this when it came back to the Brexit debate. That opens a whole can of worms. And
you would expect to see checks on trains and buses and cars being stopped, that sort of thing?
But when you're bringing in a new national identity card, that's obviously going to include checks. That's a new digital
Otherwise,
barrier.
what's the point of it?
What's the point of it? So if Keir Starmer was serious about this, you know, I know when this was first floated by Tony Blair a number of years ago, he did engage with the Irish government. He did engage with a number of other players. Keir Starmer hasn't done that. He's had no discussions or dialogue either with the Irish government or the devolved administration at Stormont. You know, there's very clearly going to be huge constitutional and legal issues here. There's been no discussion on that. And that's aside before you even get into any of the debates around the civil liberties. As callers have also been saying, this has got nothing to do with tackling immigration, just as it had nothing to do with tackling terrorism when Tony Blair proposed it, or indeed have anything to do with tackling football violence when Margaret Thatcher first floated it a number of years ago too. You know, and I want to make this point because a caller actually mentioned France. France has ID cards. It also has far higher levels of irregular migration than Britain and has much higher asylum claim rate too. Britain only ranks 17th in Europe when it comes to per capita asylum rates. There are electronic visas and residence cards already, very easily checked. And those places where migrants or where the shadow economy works, for example, they don't care about checks, and that will happen nonetheless.
So there's a real question here about whether it's even going to be effective vis-a-vis the ambition behind the card. Andrew, how do you feel about the Brit Card, or whatever they'll call it, UK ID card?
First of all, I think your callers and the earlier speakers have made all of the brilliant points. I think, firstly, let's deal with the word Brit Card. You're absolutely right. That's totally inflammatory and should not be used. And I think also Lisa Nandy's comments yesterday about the right to prove that you're entitled to be here are also inflammatory. What we need to look at is what it's actually intended to do. And what they're trying to do is actually a positive thing about improving efficiencies, as you emphasised, and also cracking down on illegal immigration. If they're only using it, and this is the question, if they're only using it for determining the right to work, then that's got to be a good thing. When people talk about personal data, I always remind them that, look, you're on CCTV 70 times a day, your supermarket knows you're shopping better than your mum does, and digital IDs, they don't add to the data, they simply tame it. So it's talking about efficiencies. And when you're looking at the cost, and I've looked at these costs, what they're saying is going to cost about 140 to 400 million, big sort of wide gap, if you like, to set it up, and about 10 million a year. You contrast that with the figures about 600 million a year it's currently costing with the inefficient system, and also fraud, which is estimated, it's a massive, massive problem, of about 3.3 billion is lost annually each year. So I think what they need to do is to change the language, turn down the rhetoric about the fear. And it was Edward Bernays, the father of PR, who said if you want to sell anything or to stop people buying anything, fear is the most powerful emotion. We're talking about identity. Data is the new currency, and we readily give away data every day with our shopping cards, with our social media posts, and all those who are complaining about digital ID, they're all doing it on social media. We're actually giving away far more data than this is ever going to happen with this particular card.
So get the comms right, keep the focus on what you're trying to do with it, and you think it could work?
I think if you sell it right, absolutely. But people need to address the fears which have been so eloquently put by your callers and other contributors to this programme. You've highlighted the issues and so on and so forth. What we need to look at is all of those, and also, as you say, the 1.7 million who are over 75 who don't have a smartphone. What they're going to get are physical cards. That's what I understand, so no one's left behind. The whole idea is to make it easier for people, so it's a one-stop shop. You don't have to go rallying around getting all the different documents and so on and so forth. It's information which is already obtained by these different agencies. All you're doing is to increase efficiency, but all of the concerns that have been raised by other people, they need to be addressed in a sort of sensible way. And I always say that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Let's actually look at what they're asking for and analyse that without spreading fear.
So, Tom, we've had the case against these cards put by Chris Hazard. We've got the case for them from Andrew Eborn. Where are you on that spectrum of possible positions to take?
I'm kind of slightly ambivalent. In principle, I don't have a problem with ID cards, and I can see some rationale for efficiency to bring them in because, personally speaking, I'm registered with the NHS, HMRC, the GP, my smart card for the Department of Transport. I'm right across the digital footprint of the government. I had to check on my license that long since I looked at it, and I looked at the old one, which had the EU logo on it, and now we just have UK, but we don't have the Royal Crest, and we don't have the Union flag.
Yeah.
So I think there will be an elaborate fudge. I do agree with Chris that there should have been some engagement between.
But Chris isn't just
Starmer.
worrying about the branding, right? They can deal with the branding. He's worried about the Good Friday Agreement, the common travel area as well.
Well, the common travel area won't be affected, and I think this will be one of the fudges that the Irish will be by and large exempted from that. But I would point out to you, there's a very senior businessman who owns a factory up in Antrim there, and I remember him telling me that when he came into Northern Ireland to work initially to be articled as an accountant, as a unionist background from Cavan, he actually had to get a work permit to come up because he came before 1948. He came before the 1949 Act, which allowed free travel. So I actually think this will be another one of the fudges, and I would like to see more of the detail. I don't think it's going to address the immigration thing. I'm in agreement with people on that. For the simple reason is, there's 200 billion in the black economy, 10% of the UK GDP, and that, in my mind, is where you find a lot of these illegal immigrants working. But that won't be grappled with.
But just address this Good Friday Agreement point for us. Do you agree with Chris Hazard that this is potentially inconsistent with the Good Friday Agreement?
I think potentially, well, because if we live in Northern Ireland, there is the reality that we're in the United Kingdom until we can vote ourselves out of it. So therefore, our digital footprint and our identity documents are British, though I carry an Irish passport. But in terms of everything where I have to transact with the government, it all goes back to the Treasury. So I don't think it really will transgress. I think Starmer will have to think through what is the implications for the common travel area, what are the implications of the Good Friday Agreement. And the bottom line is, because they have been toying so much with the idea of dealing with immigration, trying to sound tough, they sometimes push these things to the sides. But this is because there's a very clumsy government. One stat I do think is worth looking at is, ironically, Conservative voters who are now speaking out against it, 74% of them in an Ipsos poll at the start of this month, 74% of Conservatives support it. 67% of Lib Dems voters support it, 61% of Labour voters support it, and Reform, ironically, because they're libertarians, only 55% support it. But overall, there's support for bringing in an ID card.
I guess it's how, Chris Hazard, I guess it's how you pitch it to the public. If I say, would you like a new digital ID scheme that's going to make it much faster and easier for you to report potholes or the bins have not been collected or access your public services. If you pitch it that way, Chris, of course you're going to get positive responses.
But again, I think that flags up the disparities between this proposed scheme and other ID schemes that maybe operate in European states, for example, that maybe aren't mandatory. We're never, as a citizen, opts in to being able to have a more efficient way of doing it. And you can see the pros for that. But whenever you have a system where it's going to be a mandatory card, that's a very, very different question. And, I think even when you look at the debate around, well, the government has my data anyway, but I think that misses 4 key points. And the first of that is, separate systems are actually safer. So, national insurance, your driver license, your tax, your health, passport, etc., they're all stored in separate databases run by different agencies. And whilst not perfectly secure, a hacker would have to breach multiple distinct high security systems. Where if you have a single point of failure, a very centralized, linked or easily cross-referenced identity register, that's a honeypot. That's an Aladdin's cave of high-value targets that have breached. That will allow hackers, to be able to obtain complete verified profile of every citizen in one go. And you only have to look at the competency of the British state thus far to be able to deal with that. They've utterly failed when it comes to various technological projects, and even their existing data is already prone to error. You only have to look at the Windrush scandal, where failures led not only to the denial of basic human rights, but actual deportation of citizens. So centralising and digitising data doesn't make you safer. It actually makes you much more at risk and vulnerable to hackers from the outside. I think as Tom has outlined there, you have to look at the impetus of Keir Starmer to do that. He's also made a big announcement today that he's going to take on reform. I'm sorry, but, this policy is simply a case of throwing more red meat to the races, taking on reform at their own game. And Labour shouldn't be doing that. They should be tackling the real reasons why Farage is exploiting migration. They need to be tackling inequality. They should be tackling poverty, the cost of living, etc. Take away all the reasons that Farage is building the support and let him talk about people eating swans.
We're talking to Chris Hazard, Andrew Eborn and Tom Kelly. Let's take another call. Claire is in Belfast. Hi, Claire.
Hi, William. My point was that there's no legal requirement really to even have a smartphone or any phone at all. I mean, they are making it now so that you have to have a phone to claim benefits. But I know people who, when they're claiming benefits, they'll just say, look, I don't have a phone. And there's no way that they can force someone. Another thing is, if someone has a phone, that phone can be stolen. The phone can be lost.
Yeah.
If someone's sleeping in a hostel or something like that, or in one of these hotels, who's to say someone couldn't go in and lift their phone off them? Mm-hmm. Your data as well is already linked. This is being touted as something that's new. We're going to link things using the national insurance number, but the national insurance number, HMRC have just completed building a whole system there. That they're able to connect into your bank accounts. They're able to go into your phone records. They're just hiring staff at the minute for it, and they've just done a contract with, I think, Fujitsu over here for the computer system. So I think what it is that this is just a step that the government are maybe going through to try and make something that they've already done. They're trying to legalise it. Because although they're able to do this, they're only able to link up all of these details.
Yeah.
If you're under investigation by HMRC.
So what do you think if you don't think the motivation is actually the advertised motivation, which is to deal with illegal working, because they can do that one way or another right now anyway, if they get themselves organised, Claire. There are others who believe the real motivation is to take on Reform UK, and that this is really just a symbolic political gesture that we are taking illegal working seriously.
Yeah, well, it's really funny, actually, that they're taking on Reform UK, or this is about immigration. We know that what the government did recently was they gave away all of the medical records for free to Palantir over in America. So it's the Americans that have all our data at the minute. This data here, it's going to be stored probably in Fujitsu systems. I don't want to say that. I can't say that that's true, but
right.
But we know that Fujitsu have been given contracts in relation to HMRC stuff.
Yeah. And we all remember the post office scandal.
Stop immigration is incorrect, because it doesn't stop the boats coming over.
Nope.
So
Thank you.
People are going to come.
Thank you very much, Claire. Much appreciated. Michelle O'Neill, the First Minister, has called the plans for a mandatory UK-wide digital ID scheme, quote, ludicrous, ill thought out and an attack on the Good Friday Agreement. In a joint statement, the Ulster Unionist Party group has announced strong opposition to the government's scheme, the SDLP. We're still waiting to hear officially from the SDLP, aren't we? The Alliance parties come out strongly against the scheme as well. Their MP, Saoirse Eastwood, said she'll essentially be voting against it if it comes to Parliament. The TUV say, their spokesperson say, the party's still waiting to see the detail. They say they can see why there could be a civil liberties issue, and there is a danger of this being a sea border issue, but they're looking for the details. Patrick Coran from Amnesty International on the line with us now. Hi, Patrick.
Hi,
do you have any serious concerns about civil liberties around this kind of scheme?
Yes, we absolutely do. Forcing everyone to carry some form of digital ID, it is an interference with your human rights, and particularly starting with your human right to privacy, because that's the gateway to the enjoyment of lots of other rights. And I guess, bringing it down into a few sort of key arguments or key concerns that we would have. I think, first of all, we need to take the purported argument in favour from the government of the digital ID with a bit of a pinch of salt. The idea that this digital ID is going to help them tackle unauthorised immigration or stop the the people working in the black economy. I mean, people's lack of national insurance numbers doesn't stop them working in the black economy at the moment. So those employers who are happy to take people on off the books, as it were, aren't going to be overly worried about a digital ID if they're not overly worried about a national insurance number at the minute. And equally, it's not going to deter people smugglers or really take into account, if you like, what we call the pull factors that drive migration.
Yes. No, well, we've been talking about those, but I'm really particularly interested from your point of view, if you anticipate legal action around claims that, for example, European Convention rights would be breached by this legislation, the legislation to bring in this digital ID.
Well, the success of UK governments going back to the 1950s, and I certainly remember the Tony Blair attempt. You mentioned him already today, and his involvement. They've repeatedly failed to get these introduced, primarily due to public opposition. And I think, given your callers today and the discussion to date, I think there's very clear.
The public can be unhappy about some things and happy about others. But is this potentially a breach of the European Convention on Human Rights?
Well, yes, it could be. I mean, we'll have to see the detail, but the European Convention on Human Rights rightly takes very seriously people's right to privacy, and has already been touched on in some of the discussion. The tying together lots of our personal private information into national databases, and it may start off. It
happens already. It happens already.
It may start off, on one basis around, your right to be able to rent a home from a landlord or to access employment. But we can see that it'll be very easy to connect up lots of databases.
But why would that be a breach of the European Convention? The government has the right to collate data belonging to its citizens, doesn't it?
Well, we know that it can be increasingly, open to abuse, open to access to hackers. I mean, this would be a treasure trove for hackers and malign actors. But I think there's also an issue here around potential discrimination. So forcing people to carry an ID card, supposedly to tackle migration, right. I think that opens up the spectre of new risks of discrimination, including racialised policing, which we already know is a massive problem across the UK, including in Northern Ireland, in terms of stop and search and people being asked for ID. The people of colour are much more likely going to be stopped and asked for this sort of
digital
ID,
profiling, a form of racial profiling.
So Tom Kelly mightn't have a reason to be overly worried about that, but I think some of his neighbours might be, and I don't see why they should have to suffer that form of discrimination, as well as just the wider concern around identity theft, hacking of information, leaking of our private information. So I think there are a whole range of civil liberty and human rights concerns here.
Thank you, Patrick. Really appreciate it. Andrew, when you come back, you've been making the case for this.
Yes.
There are some serious concerns there about civil liberties.
Oh, no, it's absolutely right. And I think, as you say, it's fear. And I don't think we're talking about the right, you're being forced to carry it. At the moment, they're only talking about the checks for right to work and improving efficiencies. I mean, it's 110 years since ID cards were first rolled out in 1915 during World War I. And it made the whole thing a lot easier. But I go back to my central point. This is about efficiencies. All of the fears that have been highlighted on your brilliant programme are about government overreach. Once they've got this, how far are they going to take it? At this stage, we're just talking about making the right to work more efficient. So they're trying to sort of improve that efficiency and tackle illegal immigration.
So nobody would benefit to the consumers. As you say, the proposal isn't that everybody's required to carry an ID card. It is that anybody who wants to work must be able to demonstrate through this digital ID their right to work.
Absolutely. And it's making that sort of efficiency. And I go back to the stats, and it's so important to look at the stats when people talk about data. The UK has 6.4 million CCTV cameras. 99% of adults use payment cards with 2.8 billion transactions annually. Loyalty cards, 85% of UK households have them. And 82% of people are on social media. So every like, post or check-in feeds big tech data. You need to look at that. And also the government system already has. There are 191 government services, including NHS records, DVLA licences and HMRC tax profiles. They all hold this data already.
Thank you very much, Andrew Eborn, barrister, broadcaster. Thanks also to the Sinn Féin MP, Chris Hazard, and the Irish News columnist, Tom Kelly, with different responses to it. That debate's going to run and way beyond this year, I suspect.
William Crawley with Talkback on BBC Radio Ulster.